Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Let me just take a moment to ask you please to check and make sure your cell phones are turned off, anything that would make any noise. And I will tell you that we are just so honored and pleased to have Dr. Ervin Laszlo with us this evening. Dr. Laszlo, as I'm sure most of you know, is one of the world's leading system theorists. He is the author of 84 books, and his two most recent books, WorldShift 2012, which is what he will be focusing on this evening, and the Akashic Experience, in addition to several others that we carry here in the bookstore. Dr. Laszlo has twice been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He is the founder of two major international think tanks, and his books, his recent book 2012, includes chapters by Ken Wilber, the Dalai Lama, Mikhail Gorbachev, just a great many people who are all trying to essentially provide viable solutions to the remarkable mess that we seem to be so good at creating for ourselves and for this planet. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ervin Laszlo.
I'm delighted to be here and to speak to you. I'm on a kind of a whirlwind tour over California. I'm going on to Seattle tomorrow, to Canada and to New York, introducing and talking about the book, not so much necessarily about the book itself as about the topic, what it means. And I'd like to share that with you. I'm going to talk not very long. I'd like to then ask for your comments and questions and have a little discussion. I still have over 3 hours to drive tonight up to Northern California, so I will be staying very late. But let's explore what we can here. I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so the topic is the title of the book. And I'm really intent on bringing this message to as broad a public as possible. And the title, as you know, is WorldShift 2012. There's another book which is called The Akashic Experience, and I'll say very briefly that the WorldShift 2012 poses a challenge, and the way to meet the challenge is that new scientific spiritual way where science and spirit meets, which I call the Akashic Experience. So one is the current situation, the other is the way, the new wavelengths, the new way in which we can change ourselves, as Gandhi said, so we can change the world. So let me very briefly outline to you why I think WorldShift is necessary and what it is. I should just say that if I forget it, then remind me toward the end. I would like to say that these days, precisely, we are starting a new initiative, which is called the WorldShift 2012 Alliance, which is being registered as a non-for-profit foundation. In Europe, first with the European Union, but it's an international foundation, and we are inviting organizations and people to join this foundation, and I'll give you the website where that is possible. We are convinced of two things. One, that what we call a world shift, and I'll talk about it in a moment, has become necessary. And the second, that we can't meet this challenge alone. We can only meet it by cooperation, by pulling together. And this all until we have a critical mass of awakened people who will spread the word and who will begin the process of this fundamental change. I'll also talk about 2012 and why is part of the title and part of our activities. But let me just first say a few words about what I call WorldShift. This is really a planetary, global level shift that needs to start with civil society, needs to start with people. I think business will follow, I think politics will follow, and now we have an opening in this country for change. And I think elsewhere also we need a groundswell of new thinking, of more enlightened, more responsible thinking, so that we can have a sustainable world. Just before I get going, let me remind you of Einstein's saying that he first applied to his own theories and then to the situation of the world after Second World War, after the atomic bomb had been exploded. He said you can't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking in the context of which a problem arose. So we need new thinking. And I would say thinking here means new values, new beliefs, perhaps a new spirituality, a new way of looking at yourself and at the world. And then we could have a shift. Now, why do we need this shift? It's new and old at the same time. It's new, well, let me say first why it's old. It's old because human communities of a certain kind have always had a tendency to overexploit their environment. Up till about 8,000 years ago, this was not the case. Up to about 8,000 years ago, all human communities lived in the embrace of nature. Today we would say they were sustainable. They didn't know they were sustainable. They simply just didn't destroy the environment in which they operated, and they could keep going. Stone Age communities were sustained themselves for hundreds of thousands of years with very minor changes. What happened then is a certain type of mentality arose. I'm not saying it's bad. I think we have inherited this mentality, but I'm saying it's time to move beyond it. And this mentality arose in the Middle East, in the Levant, in the area that was known at the time as the Fertile Crescent. This Fertile Crescent was a verdant area. Of course it was warm, it's North Africa, but it was forested. It had a good possibilities for agriculture. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, etc., they lived in a friendly environment. They have then, in the course of the centuries, and actually millennia, this has been deforested and became an arid land. Now, this was a local catastrophe, if you might say. The brunt of the population that started from there moved into Europe, moved into Asia. Some of it moved also further down to Africa. The point is this, you see. That time, population was not very large. Altogether, humanity was produced 1.5 million people. And the technologies were relatively modest. What we could do to nature didn't have that catastrophic consequences. Sure enough, locally we overused the environment. But we could move on. People could move on. They could exploit, colonize new territories, and the process could start. And through the Middle Ages, even this trend in the West learned to live relatively sustainably. You know, the kingdoms, the princedoms of Europe through the Middle Ages, they had a harmony with nature. Of course, to some extent, they fought each other. There were always battles. But it was not this over-exploitation, this destruction of the world around them. Elsewhere in the world, the non-Western cultures, like the Native American cultures, for example, or the Chinese or the Indians, and the Africans, they continued to live in harmony with their environment. Because they have many mythologies, many ways in which they could think about this. They thought all of nature is alive, and everything around them is related to them, which are just one way of expressing their sense that we are all related to each other and to nature. But this Western strand, then at the turn of the, I'm doing world history and I recognize in a few minutes, and then I'll get to the contemporary problems. This Western strand that landed in Europe through the Middle Ages received a decisive impetus when Galileo published his letters Newton published his Principia Mathematica and Principia Physica, and then these great works were supported by the philosophy of Descartes, by the cosmology, by the astronomy of Copernicus and Kepler. What did all this mean? It meant that the world that is around us is a kind of a mechanism. We are not related to it. We can dominate this mechanism. We are over it. We have a conscious mind, and matter in the world doesn't have consciousness. Matter simply can follow what we do. So it's our task, as Francis Bacon said at the time, in brilliant words, but very misleadingly actually, that it is our task to wrench nature's secrets from her bosom. That's what he said. So we started dominating nature. And dominating nature with a misconception that we ascribed to poor Newton and poor Darwin later on, and Galileo and so on. Because these were themselves deeply spiritual people. They wrote quite different things from what their followers had attributed to them. The followers took a part of it. You see. The followers took from Newton the mechanistic view. They took from Darwin the view that but in nature there's a competition for struggle for survival, and the fittest survives. They took from Descartes, the philosopher, that there's a radical separation between the outer world, matter, and the inner world, the mind, the consciousness, and the two. There was even a question: how could they communicate the two together? Where did they come together? So this kind of worldview created a whole movement, a tendency which had a tremendous success in technology. When you discover the power of the steam, and the power of mass production, and the power of mechanized agriculture, transportation, all of that. Of course, there were good effects as well. Life expectancy expanded. We learned to correct for some diseases. At the same time, we created a more and more unhealthy environment, so we needed more and more corrections to be able to survive. Now, elsewhere in the world, non-Western cultures continued to live sustainably until they were infected, as it were, by this mode of thinking. Now, what I'm saying in summary is I'm saying that in much more detail in the book, with illustrating it with data and references and so on, is that what is happening to us is not new in itself. Only the kind of mentality that has created this kind of exploitation and over-exploitation, domination of the world has been limited to one part of humanity, and this part of humanity became dominant. So we are now exporting this kind of mentality and the technologies and the values and the worldviews that go with it, exporting to all parts of the world. It came to this country, as you know, 200 years ago or thereabouts, and it received very fertile soil. It's going west and dominating the environment and exploiting whatever one could. I'm very much aware that now I'm speaking at a point where you can't go much further west than this, but we could always move in this direction. We're saying young men go west, young men, meant to exploit more and more territory. Now, we have learned that this globe is a spaceship, that it's a closed system. It's not a spaceship because everything that we do on it remains on it. And this kind of what is new here, therefore, is not that we are overexploiting, but what is new is that we are overexploiting and destroying on a global planetary scale. That's what's new. We didn't notice that this is what's happening. Until then, the catastrophes, the problems were local. One could move on. One could also correct. The technologies were not as powerful as now. The population was not so large. Now, probably we are up to 7 billion people today. And the problems that we have are enormous on the level of the ecology, on the level of the economy, we have probably half of the human population living in poverty. 2.3 billion are short of water, safe water. 1.5 billion living on the equivalent of $1 a day. And what's happening to big cities, what's happening to the countryside, is a process which is a consequence of our mentality, which we have exported, which simply says it's up to us to dominate, to do with this world what we want. We will obey because it's a soulless and mechanical aggregate around us. We are not responsible for it. It's there for us to do what we want. Okay. So we have reached the planetary scale on this, and now we are learning that you can't do that on a spaceship. And you keep doing this kind of thing on a spaceship, what you're doing is you're over-exploiting, exhausting your energy supplies. It's like going up with a certain number of batteries into the spaceship, which in our case are the fossil energies. If we use them, we'll be depleted. If you keep doing this kind of economics has been known as the lasso economics, where you just lasso the resources, you exploit them from the earth, you take them out of the earth, excavate them from the earth, you manufacture them, you process them, you use them, and you throw them back again. If you keep doing that, sooner or later the spaceship gets full of garbage. The trash, the waste is rising. We thought that we could do this infinitely, almost infinitely. Who would have thought, 5,000 years ago, that if you threw something into the river and it washed down to the sea, that it would come back to you, to bother you, and to create a problem for you? Who would have thought that if you burned something in the open air and the smoke went up and the wind took it away, that it would come back in the form of polluted air? Who would have thought that this is a finite world? For all practical purposes, it was infinite. Now when we are 7 billion people using these enormously powerful technologies, we are extracting the wealth of the earth, of the biosphere, transforming it and throwing it back again, and we know that this is not sustainable. If you make any kind of a projection, I'll come up soon to now 2012 in a moment, if you make any kind of a projection forward, you will recognize that there is a finite time that we have available for continuing to do this. So we're doing it in such a large scale that, oil has already peaked. Water has, safe water, as they now say, has peaked. Now it's going to cost more and more to produce drinkable water in the world, because it's getting polluted, because the water levels, our drinkable water levels are going down. At the same time, we are melting the ice caps, especially this in the Antarctic, where from the Antarctic shelves, large sheets of ice are floating into, are moving as a glacier moving into the ocean, about 104 billion tons a year estimated, and that means that the water level is rising in the world. Up till now, this ice was on a shelf, it moves down into the sea, it adds to the amount of water. This is not the case in the northern, in the Arctic region, because there's floating ice. Floating ice, it doesn't make any difference. In the Antarctic, it's keeping producing a rise, and these glaciers have gotten going now to this extent. So we can expect current projections show up to possibly 1 meter or yard of sea level rise, perhaps in the next 10 to 15 years. This would create serious problems. You can just see what it do in California to areas which are close to the sea level. You would know that better than I do. But we will know that it would create serious problems in Manhattan. It's very nice to go with a gondola in Venice, but you don't want to do that on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And London, Tokyo, practically all the big cities of the world, the largest cities, are near the sea level, and they would be flooded. And enormous areas of productive land. In Bangladesh, 300 million people, habitats will be flooded, an enormous productive area for food production, for Asia over there will be flooded. Already today, many of the Pacific islands are in danger of being simply covered with water, flooded and submerged. about 10 days ago, it was in the news, the government of the Maldives Islands, it's a favorite vacation resort. Not too many people live there, but it's a marvelous tropical paradise. And they're very keen, obviously, on surviving and their land and maintaining themselves and communicating the problem. And they have held their first governmental meeting underwater, scuba diving. But they didn't talk to each other, they just gesticulated, but it made the news media. It was widely reported. Because already today, dozens of Pacific islands are flooded. And if this sea level rise continues in this way, it would, many more would be. Okay, I'm spending maybe 100 pages or so in this book, and I can't do this in detail here. It's not even necessary, to show why our ecological, economic, and social systems are not sustainable. The